Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Sachs, and on behalf of Campbell and Company, I would like to welcome you to Campaign Planning During Uncertain Times. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. Close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. We recommend calling in with a phone instead of using your computer speakers. If you experience visual issues, send a chat to Campbell and Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes and you'll earn 1 continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. In that same follow-up email, you'll also receive a link to download today's slides along with a link to the recording. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar. Please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We will hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters today, Campbell and Company Vice President Melissa Berliner and Campbell and Company Senior Consultant Erin Culbertson.
Thanks so much, Molly, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, to our attendees. We're so glad to have you with us, and we're so excited that you are excited about campaign planning as we are. My name is Melissa Berliner. I'm a vice president with the firm, and I've been in my role for about 14 years. I am part of our Midwest team, currently residing in our Chicago office. Thanks, Melissa. Great to be with you this morning and with all of our audience as well. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Erin Culbertson. I'm a senior consultant at Campbell and Company. I've been with the company for 3 years, and I'm a part of our West Coast team. We're residing in our Seattle office. So today we're going to dig in on strategies for campaign planning during uncertain times. We'll first look at a typical planning process, and then we'll examine what has changed and what hasn't changed. And then, of course, dig in on recommended strategies for approaching campaign planning during these uncertain times. As Molly mentioned, we'll leave plenty of time for questions, so please do submit your questions along the way in the question box, and we'll tackle those at the end during a Q&A. So our context. The context that we're living in are certainly uncertain times. That might be the understatement of the year, and I recognize that we're just a few days into the year of 2021. And we do recognize that uncertainty and planning can feel like they don't go hand in hand. But we've faced uncertain times before, not necessarily a global pandemic, not that, no, but we have faced economic recession, political uncertainty, social movements. So the uncertainty of the context that we're living in now is new, and yet we can learn from the past. And there is one very important thing that hasn't changed, and that is the needs of your community, the mission that you deliver in your community. In fact, it might be more apparent than ever that you need to serve your community. But in some cases, yeah, those needs are more obvious, and you and your organization are being called to action. You can't pause now. It's a critical time to find a path forward for delivering your mission and for funding that mission, likely through philanthropy. And the good news is that your donors are still giving. Remember these neat and tidy flow charts? Remember when one set of activities neatly moved into the next set of activities, and we could kind of forecast what would be coming next? This is a typical planning process, or at least it was at one point. And we'll argue that many of these points remain the same. But in a typical planning process, a campaign would pass through 6 phases over, let's say, a 3 to 6 year period. Some campaigns would go even longer. Some higher ed organizations, I'll protect the innocent and not name names, have even ventured into the 10-year campaign, but still passing through these activities. In our opinion, a campaign clock really started and continues to start when you dream about something bigger, bolder, different, unique, something that's going to move your organization from a point A to a point B. And in recent years, we've all grown accustomed to the comprehensive campaign model. So for a while there, we were fundraising for one thing, one shiny penny project. In recent years, we've even moved into this menu approach where we're really allowing donors to choose between capital and endowment and program, reserve fund, and other interesting projects to consider that might match their interests. But over the first 3 months to up to 3 years, we would be in planning mode where we're defining our vision and creating plans for the future. We were looking at our strategic plan, our business plan, our facility plan, our economic plan. There were all sorts of plans that we were crafting in these first few months, first year or so. And then we would move to a study phase or a testing phase where we would take our assumptions and bring them out into the community and get their input on our plans, on our vision for the future. Based on that input, we spend a few months refining our project and really honing in on our campaign goal before we would move to a launch, a soft launch, a quiet launch, where we were engaging campaign leaders, volunteer leaders, getting our staffing and systems aligned, really looking to the board to provide early commitments and opt in early to show a sign of strength and momentum to the peers around them. And then we'd spend another 2 to 4 years in active fundraising, where we were taking our campaign to a broader audience, soliciting those closest to us, further removed, and anyone else who would hear our story and get behind our campaign vision before we would turn to our celebration and transition to ongoing annual fundraising. And in many cases, that meant planning for the next campaign. And you see there on the bottom of this neat and tidy chart, the donor timeline. Donors were present from the beginning to the end, from the planning phase, which we were using as an opportunity to engage, inspire, and cultivate, to the solicitation phase, and ultimately to their stewardship phase, where we invited them to celebrate with us and join in the acknowledgement of our collective impact. So this is perhaps what was, and some of it is still in place, but let's talk about what has changed. Uncertainty. We've now said that 6 times, Erin. I think that was the word of the day, exactly. So certainly uncertainty is especially high. Even in that neat and tidy illustration, though, I would say that campaigns always maintained a level of dynamism. We often talk about campaigns as living, breathing enterprises. You plan and you put your best foot forward, but oftentimes we would have to course correct along the way. And in fact, this gave many fundraisers and nonprofit leaders a comfort with ambiguity that is serving as wonderful armor now as we move through this time period. So even though uncertainty is high, I would argue to say that many of you on the line have been preparing for this and have been living in some level of uncertainty throughout your careers. We observe that in this moment, external factors are changing daily by the minute. We're closed, we're not closed. It's safe, it's not safe. We're really looking at the headlines and adjusting our day-to-day, moment by moment, and that has a serious impact on our fundraising planning. Along those lines, our needs, or our definition of needs, are shifting. So many of you working in physical buildings, even if you are remote, are thinking about how you return safely to a building, what might need to change in your building in order to be safe. If you let others, non-staff inside your building, then you're thinking about how to do that safely. So our physical needs, our physical plant needs are changing. We're trying to get our arms around them, and certainly we're thinking about that through a fundraising lens. Right along those lines, technology needs are shifting as we move to a virtual world, as we move to virtual programming and engagement of donors. So having those tools at the ready, and of course being prepared to do so and to leverage those tools to their greatest possible impact. And then finally, this this world we're in, where we're all questioning our systems, we're reaffirming and in some cases affirming our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And we are adjusting our program plans accordingly and questioning so much of what we do. And again, the incredible impact that has on our fundraising planning for now and in the future. Even though a lot has changed, there are some things that remain the same and that harken back to that neat and tidy flow chart. Your organization has fundraising priorities, and if you don't put your vision and needs out there, there's a perception that you don't have needs. Okay, so there's this balancing act of we have needs, we realize that we're part of a larger group, a whole of people who have needs, and finding the right dial or tone to express what you need in recognition of the greater whole. And we recognize that even though we don't have the answers, there is not one person in any industry in life right now who has all the answers. We need to show up to our donors with some level of answer, with some level of confirmation that we've assessed our needs and we know how donors can help us get from here to there. So fundraising priorities and articulation of needs maintains a constant. We would argue that planning is still the best risk management strategy. So even in this uncertainty there, I've said it yet again, risk management is best managed through a thoughtful and iterative planning process. And then finally, campaigns are visionary. They continue to be visionary. So I talked with a client recently who shared, we have all these problems that existed prior to the pandemic. We've amassed a few more problems along the way. And so we'd like to put that together into a campaign. And we had a very honest conversation about how campaigns need to be visionary. There still needs to be a transformative element, and it can't be the problem campaign is not super compelling for donors. So we still have to articulate that vision, that North Star. We need to have alignment around that as a staff team and as a board, and really be able to articulate where we're headed, even though the path may change along the way. So it begs the question, how to approach campaign planning during these uncertain times. We can learn from the past, even though what we're facing is also unprecedented. But of course, this current context also calls for a unique approach and for flexibility and adjusting the status quo in how we think about our work. So long-term vision and a short-term plan. Melissa just said it. That North Star continues to be critical. That strategic plan, that vision, that's the direction that we're going. And that vision might be something that's 5+ years out from being realized. It can be a little ways down the road. It can be future oriented. But the thing that has changed is in the past, we might have taken a 5-year strategic plan and put alongside it a 5-year campaign operating plan. And that really doesn't meet the need of the moment. A 5-year operating plan for a campaign really implies too much that we know the context in which we'll be fundraising 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now. And so we can still take that vision, that 5-year plan, that far off North Star, and we can activate a plan, but that plan might look like something that is 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, some shorter period of time out in the future that we're really mapping a plan that we can follow and that leaves room for flexibility as well. When we've done our strategic planning processes in the past, we've often undertaken, engaging a lot of folks. Maybe the effort is led by the board, and we promise ourselves, this is a living and breathing document. We will, refer to this regularly, this plan that we've just put together. But what often happens is we've checked the box and maybe the strategic plan gets a little dusty. Maybe we don't revisit it as often as we thought we might. But these times that we're living in are really a call to action to shift that work. And in order to make that shift, we really need a set of individuals who are accountable for keeping that strategic plan alive and well and right in front of our faces so that we can continue to see our North Star, our map forward, and examine the changing landscape and make those pivots as needed. So consider a board committee that is charged with this task. We often have a board committee that leads a strategic planning process that disbands after that process is complete. Maybe we keep that group going, or we reinstate one now. And they're really charged with that active work of monthly revisiting the strategic plan and considering it against the landscape that we're living in. It's interesting because we actually at Campbell and Company, where Melissa and I work, we've made some of these changes as well. Our leadership team is meeting weekly in a way that they didn't in the past. They're examining the North Star, the current landscape, the context, and the ways that we can best meet the needs of our clients in the nonprofit community. And they're communicating weekly as well with all of the members of our company. Those are changes that really meet the moment and allow for a high level of pivot, a high degree of focus on that long-range North Star, and adjustments of plans of how we're activating that work in the daily, in the weekly, in the monthly. I was working for a client, as the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and we had a campaign plan that was, for several years of work. It was early in the campaign. It was a capital project, and the need for the capital project didn't change. That remains the North Star. They needed this expansion in order to serve more community members. That remained constant. But the operating plan for the campaign completely shifted on a dime. Things we thought we were going to be able to do in a leadership gift phase were no longer accessible or accessible in the same way. Internal needs in the organization about how they deliver their services changed. That pulled some staffing from the campaign for periods of time. So there were a lot of changes that had to be flexible. And it was really important that we had a leadership team that was meeting regularly, who could continue that vigilance to that North Star, to securing the funding needed for this campaign in order to bring this capital project about, and this vision. And that team being vigilant allowed us to make a work plan for the foreseeable weeks or months as needed, and then develop the next phase of that plan as we approach that timeline and make regular pivots and continue to achieve our goals. If the idea of a plan sounds too formal or not attainable in this moment, we invite you to consider two ways forward that might feel a little more comfortable: scenario planning and then prioritized phase planning. So, in scenario planning, it is reasonable in this moment to have three different plans that might be activated based on external factors and the shifts that you're encountering. The key is that all three plans need to bubble up to the same North Star that Erin and I have talked about. So it's about honing in on that North Star, coming to agreement around it internally and externally, and then identifying three possible paths that might get you there. And then the work is around building buy-in and consensus from your donors, that this North Star is the right idea, it is the right way forward, and that they trust the organization to make the right choices and pivot when necessary to activate different plans. If you wait for the perfect conditions, they will never arrive. This was pre-pandemic, okay? So this is not new. I would say there's a magnifying glass on that right now. But if you know your options, your scenarios, you know when conditions are good enough and you are ready to go. I have a client right now who is in the process of activating scenario 2A. So we had scenarios 1, 2, and 3, and then we created a 2A, which was slightly different from 2, but along that theme. And we're activating right now in their campaign. And the pleasant surprise for all of us is that the act of building out these scenarios, the act of engaging stakeholders, board members, staff leaders, and some donors in the architecture of these scenarios has brought the organization closer. There's greater buy-in from all. And as we're in this early phase of their campaign, the board giving is so strong and higher than we would have anticipated maybe prior to the pandemic, which is super exciting to see. So it's that due diligence, that thoughtfulness, that active engagement, bringing people along, letting them in under the hood a bit to understand, and ultimately building trust in the organization to make the right choices at the right time to do the right things. So that's an example of some scenario planning that might be a fit. Another thought we offer is prioritized phased planning. So this is kind of a version of the comprehensive campaign, right? So I mentioned a few minutes ago, we moved into this period of comprehensive campaigns, the menu, where we had a bit of capital and program, maybe some endowment or reserve funds, and some other things sprinkled in. So in prioritized phasing, you're still doing that work, you're still building the menu, but now you're sequencing those activities in a perhaps more deliberate way. And you are thinking about which projects you might tackle first, second, and third, why that sequencing is important and distinctive, and how that ladders up again to your North Star. So the North Star stays the same here, but you're thinking about priorities and phasing in a different kind of way. I have an example of a client that moved to this model. They were in a campaign prior to the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, they took a collective beat, as we all did, to think about, where they go next. And once we all realized we were in this for the long haul, they reactivated their campaign, focusing on one particular project. And what's great about this is that, in this moment where you have some donors who can talk about that 5-year stretch gift, right? They're in a fortunate position to still think in that way. You have some donors who can't, or either their perception is they can't think in those terms. So you can talk with them about this idea that we know you can't consider your best gift right now, but can you consider a gift toward this prioritized phase as part of a journey to your best gift in the future? And we are finding a lot of success with that kind of stair-stepped approach. It's a new kind of approach, I think, in fundraising. We were always concerned about the second ask, the third ask, the fourth ask. I think the reality is that this may allow you to talk with donors in a more authentic and candid way about where they are, what they're able to consider in this very unique and uncertain time, and how we can align their giving that feels right for them and still advances the sort of organizational mission and the vision for the campaign. In either scenario, whether you're considering scenario planning or prioritized phasing, we do want to share with you that there are a certain set of questions that donors are asking right now. Believe it or not, we are still doing campaign feasibility studies. We have been through March. I was sharing with Erin as we were preparing for today. I have been working on the same number of feasibility studies with clients that I would have been in any other year. We are approaching them different. We're thinking about the types of questions we ask in a different way, but we are still very much moving forward with sort of that classic feasibility study. And we've been collecting a series of different or unique questions that donors are asking about campaigns. And here are a few that we share with you. So donors wanting to understand how these scenarios or phases really meet community needs versus donor needs. This is a big pivot for us as a sector. We were always focused, or we have been focused on that menu, that donor-centered menu of programs or projects that speak to their interests and values. There is still that theme present, but a larger theme, a louder theme right now is how is your work laddering up or coming together to support identified community needs? And this is all sectors being called to ask this question. a new question or phrasing that we're hearing out there on the campaign trail is, what is your risk management strategy? So this used to be the how will you sustain it once you build it question. I think that question is still present, but now we're being asked and called to answer our risk management strategy and our approach to that, and how the campaign that we're pursuing or considering is inclusive of that risk management. And then I would say finally, there are new questions around what success looks like. For a while as a sector, we've been battling with donor questions related to numbers and metrics. Those are still present, but I feel that there is so much more emphasis on impact right now and distinguishing that from outcomes. So really being thoughtful in your planning and in your case building so that you can really hone impact in a concrete and measurable way. Erin?
Yeah, I think that's so great, Melissa. I was just thinking about what you were saying about phased planning and maybe talking with a donor about a shorter term horizon for their own giving, and that is, maybe not an approach we were taking in the recent past and now a real viable option. And I think that work really leads to this next topic of using planning to build consensus, because the nature of proposing to a donor a phased campaign, essentially, or phased vision or phased implementation of a vision and phased giving for them as well, really invites a long-term conversation with the donor, I think. And that's so important. I think that of everything that I see about these times that we're facing right now, I see a real opportunity to actually be in conversation. I think we can have an instinct when things are uncertain, when things are scary, and to hunker down, to turn inward, to ride this out and then sort of emerge from that smoke-filled room with, a new plan or this plan or this vision. But I really think that this is a perfect time to lean into relationship building. When we are facing this uncertainty, we can make assumptions, particularly about our donors, about, what they're facing. Well, our donors don't have the capacity to give right now, so I won't ask. Or our donors are busy, so they don't have the time to take my call. Or our donors are worried about their own businesses or families, and so, this wouldn't be a priority for them. But really, just as Melissa was saying, our donors are actually, some of them, many of them are thinking about us, are thinking about our work, are thinking about our partnership with them, and the missions that we deliver, the vision that we have for uplifting our communities. They're curious about that. They're eager to stay involved. Just as Melissa was saying, some of these questions, they might be asking us or want to ask us if they had an opportunity to be in dialogue, if we were reaching out. What emerging needs do you see as a nonprofit expert in this area emerging in our community? How is your plan at your organization, your nonprofit, this might be a question from a donor, addressing your effort to dismantle a racist system? They're curious. They want to know how you're thinking about that. How are you pivoting as a nonprofit right now to serve and deliver your mission in a new world, in these new ways, in a virtual platform, for example? They're curious about that. So as much as we have an instinct perhaps to hunker down or go figure things out and then come back out to our donors, I think we have a real opportunity here to lean in and get out there and be in this dialogue, to talk with our donors, our supporters, our volunteers, folks in the communities that we serve. We have an opportunity to share with them how we're adjusting, how we're thinking about adjusting, how we're approaching that process. We have an opportunity to also, and this is key, I think, have curiosity. We need to turn those assumptions into opportunities for curiosity with our donors. What is happening with our donors and their families and their businesses? What pivots are they making? Those are great questions for your donors. We might ask them their thoughts on our planning process or on the questions that we're asking internally. Maybe
along a parallel path with when we're answering those questions internally. We're out there sharing those questions more broadly and gathering thoughts and sharing about our process to answer those questions and to arrive at our plan. And we can certainly ask them too about their mental and financial bandwidth that they have to continue supporting your organization and how they want to be involved, what sort of frequency of contact, or how you can best continue to be in dialogue with them as plans develop and as needs are clarified, and how you can ask for their financial support to bring this vision to life. Ask them that question directly. They'll answer you. They'll say if they're ready or when they're ready or what kind of cadence works for them. You know, we as organizations, we're not trying to go into a planning process like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat and saying, you know, ta-da, here it is. Here's our vision. It's all packaged. It's beautiful. And now we're going to ask for your support. You know, we really want our donors and our community to be calling us and saying, hey, it was so interesting, the work that you guys are in the process of doing, you know, that we talked about a couple of months ago. What's happening now? When's that campaign going to start? How can I help? You know, that's a sign of a really engaged donor, and that means you're bringing them along in the process as it's unfolding. When we think about engaging our donors and community through this process, we might think about, well, who all should we include? And there are certainly some natural constituencies that you would look to for including in this process. Certainly the board, both as a whole and as individuals involving those folks, the community that you serve, your major donors, other key stakeholders and partners as well. We want to see these members of our community more than, you know, just informed. We want to see them as co-creators, ready to activate this vision, as people and individuals and organizations that have been brought along in our planning process and are ready to be this set of champions that we need. You know, I think that when it comes to our board engagement, we've often thought of, you know, 100% board participation in a campaign, for example, as a key marker of board engagement. And that hasn't changed. That's still true. That's still critical. We need that group of leaders to be first in making their personally meaningful investments. But it really isn't the only measure of engagement. And I think we need and want to do more with this group as individuals and as a group so that they can show up in new ways and bigger ways and in more deeply engaged ways. You know, we want these board members engaging in that heavy lifting of keeping our strategic plan a living and breathing document, as we talked about earlier. We want our board members directly involved in solicitations, you know, certainly helping open doors in the community, but also being an advocate, being a storyteller for the work that you're doing in the community and helping to influence additional philanthropy to support that work. And we want board members who are engaged in developing a board recruitment strategy that sets the organization up for success in the long term. What skills and attributes do we need of this group of leaders going forward? And how can we reach out into the community and cultivate potential future leaders and bring them in to this conversation to help direct our future for the long term? Those of us who have been brought up in a certain kind of fundraising, myself included, I'll admit, I think there can be an impulse to have everything perfect. You know, we want to have that plan perfectly packaged. We want to be able to answer every single question. And I think, as Melissa said, it's certainly on us and on our organization to put a stake in the ground, to have a vision, to be able to answer questions. But we don't have to be able to answer every single question. These can be iterative, relationship-building conversations that we have with our donors and stakeholders, and that actually leads to deeper engagement. You know, when one of our donors brings something up and we say, gosh, that's a great point, or we've been talking about that and we're engaged in this process to come to resolution on that really great question that you're bringing up, or our experts are researching XYZ and that's going to influence our next steps. I'm so glad you brought that up, or it's really neat that you're interested in that. That really leads to this engaged champion, this engaged donor. So these uncertain times actually allow us to lean into that if we were not so inclined in the past, because our donors also, they are living in this context. They don't expect you to know everything. They expect you to be pivoting, to be wise, creative, and flexible in your pivoting, but to be pivoting and pivoting regularly, not just once in March of 2020 or in June of 2020. That wasn't the only pivot. These pivots are ongoing. The context is changing regularly, and donors are expecting that of us, and they're expecting to be brought along in understanding how those pivots are unfolding. So lean in, have those conversations, allow those conversations to be dialogues rather than presentations, and you will be rewarded with a more deeply engaged, more activated set of donors and community members that are ready to be your champions to bring your vision to life.
We're anxious to get to your questions and experiences because we are co-creating this new campaign world with you as consulting partners and fundraising experts and fundraising leaders, executive leaders. We're all in this together, figuring it out. But we do want to leave you with a few thoughts before we open it up. So thought number one, don't be afraid to launch. People are launching campaigns in this unique time. There is no reason why you shouldn't consider one if you've done the due diligence and thoughtful work that Erin and I have been talking about. There is no perfect time. There has never been a perfect time. Campaigns have always been a no risk, no reward proposition, and that remains true. You are rolling out this vision and plan because you have authentic need. You know, if you need to copy and paste that and put that up so you remind yourself that the authenticity here is so important to your own motivation and also that of your donors. And in fact, if you don't believe your need is authentic, no one else will. So it starts with you declaring the need and finding the authenticity. Stay true to the vision, execute your plan, and remain flexible to feedback and changing external conditions. Use every pivot as an opportunity to grow and learn and engage. We are really seeing on the ground how donors are appreciating that kind of involvement and engagement with nonprofits. There's no need to be perfect right now. There is a need to be thoughtful, planful, and responsive. And that's all anyone could ask of you or expect from you. Don't assume anything. Ask donors where they are in their journey, in their healing, in their thinking, in their consideration. Don't project what your donors may be thinking or feeling about the market or the vision or your vision. Ask them, talk to them, and stay curious. We were told early in this pandemic that we need to give people space, right? Stay apart, space. That might be physical space, but don't take that too literally. In fact, this is the time to bring people closer. Well, take it literally for your safety out when you're out in the world, but don't take that literally when you're engaging with someone in a safe channel, such as the one we're using today. Use these channels, use these safe channels to connect with people and ask them questions. There is sort of a mutual understanding right now that the pandemic has turned everyone's life upside down, no matter who you are. That is a constant. You know, we have different interpretations of that, but it remains a constant. So that creates a new level of understanding and empathy, which is the ideal setup for candid conversations with donors. So please leverage this moment in that way. So with that, Molly, I'll turn it back to you for questions. We're anxious to hear from you and to learn from you.
Thanks, Melissa. We do have a few questions that have come through, and I encourage anyone else who has questions, please continue to send them through the questions box. So we will get started with this one. How much time does it take to come up with a work plan? Sometimes it takes more time to come up with a plan than execute the plan. And who needs to be part of the work plan?
That's such a great question because I think it's intrinsic to the idea that our plan needs to have flexibility, that the planning process itself also have a component of flexibility. I think that's one reason why creating a plan that's relatively short term can hopefully shorten also that planning process. You know, if we know the North Star that we're going toward, what is our next milestone that's 3 months out or 6 months out? And, you know, then I think if you understand that milestone, that would also drive who needs to be involved in the planning process itself. If that next milestone is, you know, securing X dollars or engaging these 20 particular constituents, then, you know, who are the relationship managers of those constituents? Those folks need to be involved in how we're going to build out the strategies to engage that particular group, if that's the milestone we're working toward. I don't know, Melissa, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all wishing to move swiftly in this moment, right? So there's definitely an impulse to move quickly. In days before, we might consider a planning process to be anywhere from 6 to 12 months, depending on how many components you're undertaking. If you're doing, you know, feasibility studies and economic studies and market studies and business planning, financial projections, right? There could be many pieces that you roll into your work planning process. In this time, we are working with our clients on really flexible, nimble tools, right? So working with one client on a strategic roadmap, right? So we're not ready to call it a plan yet, but it's a roadmap. And we've spent probably 2 months just iterating on it. Within a week, we could come up with the basic frame for this. We engaged senior leaders within the organization and some board members to just map out a basic frame, sort of that North Star and the, you know, high-level goals that bubble up to that North Star. And then we task individual people, departments with filling out more tactical elements and metrics. And so that work was done in just a couple months, but then we didn't declare it final. You know, it's the roadmap. So we were able to iterate on it and still engage people outside of our work group and have conversations and tinker and tweak, and thus still build the buy-in process, still leverage the buy-in process as an important tool. So, you know, I think within a couple of weeks, we, as an organization, we should be able to put together some level of architecture around who we are, where we're going, and the key activities that will drive that, and then use the remaining months to fill in some blanks and test and learn.
Thank you. Next question. Are many nonprofits just planning to have virtual events this year, or should the plan A be to host in person and plan B to be digital experience / virtual? This person says that they have their 10th annual walk this year in October.
Gosh, you're just on the cusp there, right?
Yeah, October. I was all set to answer that question. Then I heard October and I was like, yep, that is I feel like October and later is where I'm hearing the most questions from my clients about, you know, making that call. And we actually have some materials about planning virtual events and scenario planning for events in this environment on the Campbell & Company website. So I do encourage you to check out those resources. I think there's some articles there that really speak to this. And so, yeah, I think it's a really great question. I would say that in my experience with clients, things before October are pretty much guaranteed planning virtual. That's the plan. We're not making an alternative plan, and we're really pouring resources into making that digital experience, you know, meet our goals and engage our community the way that we hope to engage them. I don't know, Melissa, what are you seeing for the fourth quarter?
Yeah.
I see more you know, dual paths happening for fourth quarter, or maybe alternate, or what if it could be really small. So I'm seeing a little more of that for fourth quarter. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I would say I agree. Alternate plan. So version A, B, which I know creates more work, but nonetheless feels like the safest choice and avoids some more, even more work if you need to pivot later.
I think there's a feeling in a sense that, we will return to some level of in-person gathering in the fall, but how comfortable will people be is
Right.
still the question. Just because we can, will they? So that's still the question mark we're hearing. But honestly, much of this is geographic and how your civic leadership is presenting the moment. As we work around the country, and I have to remember what city I'm in often as I talk about the experience of the pandemic, because it is so city specific. The best possible thing you can do is ask your constituents what their comfort level is, and keep asking. It's a great way to engage and keep donor conversations going.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. Do you have any thoughts about engineering a long-range strategic planning experience with board members that communicate a greater meaning, not just committee work or business as usual?
Can you say that one more time, Molly? Any concerns? Is that the question?
Do you have any thoughts about engineering a long-range strategic planning experience?
So I don't. I think key for me is your definition of long range, right? So prior to pandemic, we were already losing steam on the 5-10-year plan. Some of us were even doing 15-year, 20-year plans, right? I think we were already losing steam on that, and the strategic plans, at least I was working on, just prior to pandemic, were more in the 3-year range. So already, I would say we were tempering. So I think one question I have is, what is your definition of long range? I go back to what Erin said: declare your long range plan, caveat on the definition, and then maintain some sort of process or protocol to keep it alive and to refresh, reconsider, rework. So I think, engaging a board in a conversation around the North Star and key activities that will get us there, always a good idea. Equally important is the process that keeps that work alive while you're working the plan. Erin, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the thing I would add there is, I don't know if I'm reading into the question accurately or not with this, but maybe is there something in the question about how long should a planning process take, a strategic planning process take? And, yes, there's the question, are we looking at a long range vision that's more than 3 years? But also, are we thinking this process might take 12 months in order to develop this plan? And I think that my two questions in response to that would be, does this planning process interrupt our ability to serve and deliver and execute now? Are we sort of creating a planning process that's so big that we aren't activating much more than just planning? I don't know that works right now. So really, balancing those things. And then, what you were saying as well. I don't think that we're trying to create a large and cumbersome process that is long lasting and that develops a plan that's 5, 10 plus years out. We're looking for something more nimble, but that engages, many of our constituents. And I think there's a bit of the silver lining of the pandemic in that, because the digital engagement, I find, there are certainly some questions of accessibility with digital engagement, but then there are other things about digital engagement that create a little more efficiency in engagement. We can have a 45-minute listening session with, 15 stakeholders, and the ability for those 15 stakeholders to participate in that listening session is relatively low impact. It's more of a 45-minute impact than it is a 3-hour impact of, I'm going there, and then would we do a 45-minute meeting if it took all that effort? No. So now we're planning this longer conversation. So I think there is some silver lining opportunities in creating a planning process that engages more of our stakeholders, but still in a relatively efficient and short time period. Through some of these channels. And I hope that's one of the legacies of what we've learned collectively in the sector from this time.
because I do think it creates a little more accessibility in some ways.
Great. And this is a nice segue to the next question. How has technology access and evolution changed our planning and donor relationship building? What do we need to do to utilize it better and faster for future campaigns?
Mm-hmm. Such a great question, and I think a really important one. And again, I do hope this is a legacy that comes from this time. I think that we do, we can consider ourselves early adopters in this moment, and we can lean into these technologies. And I think that it creates an opportunity for, like I was saying, accessibility. So certainly there are many video, platforms and channels, but I think what people are doing in small and large event spaces with platforms and really creating those spaces where conversation can happen is really interesting, and we'll want to keep that up. And I don't think we have to sit back as a nonprofit sector and say, we can't move that faster. We don't know how to do it. We can lean in. We can learn with the rest of the world who's rapidly adapting too. And I think come out with engagement opportunities that are really important in our planning and our fundraising efforts as well.
Yeah, I would just add on, I've seen committee member, board member participation increase so much in this time, in part because they're called to lead, right? But also because, as they got comfortable with the Zoom and the other channels, right? Then we could do creative things like breakout rooms and polls and really find ways to engage diverse voices. It really calls on you as the facilitator to learn some new tricks in terms of how you facilitate a virtual room. I know we've definitely learned some new tricks. We've shared those with some of our clients. It is a different, it's a different engagement experience, but one that can be so effective. We've been doing strategic planning and other phase planning, other versions of planning, just really using these tools in a great way. And I think the donor experience has been quite positive, such that and they keep coming back for more. We had a campaign planning committee meeting where 45 people opted in on Zoom. This would have never happened in a boardroom. It just wouldn't have. And so we were able to do some really cool things to make it fun and engaging.
Yeah. And I think I'll just add one more thing to that in terms of donor engagement and technology. In the past, I would find myself saying, and I think we often said, this meeting, this solicitation, this cultivation meeting must be face to face. And I've really replaced that language with it must be personalized and tailored, because the face-to-face component, when that really opens back up again, it'll be an important tool. I'm not going to suggest that face-to-face doesn't have meaning. I think it does. But I think the core thing that we were meaning when we said face-to-face is personalized and tailored, where you're really showing up to that meeting prepared and inviting someone into a conversation that can be meaningful for them. And so I hope that's another legacy of this time, is that we focus on personalized and tailored rather than, just face to face. I certainly have had, many conversations in a Panera Bread somewhere in America that were face to face, but were they using, maybe they were engaging, maybe they weren't. I don't know. They were face to face. But if that's the focus, if that's the only thing we're measuring, then I think we're missing an opportunity to focus on and measure the more important thing that we're all focused on now with digital engagement, which is it personalized, is it tailored? And I think donors are really responding to that as well.
Thanks. Next question. The idea that planning needs to occur in shorter term chunks of time makes sense. The challenge that we are running into is the need to ensure that the needed resources to support the campaign are in place when we do ramp up. To get those resources committed, the need for a longer-term plan is in demand. Are you working with clients to help put a parallel planning process in place, short-term and long-term?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm was working on a strategic plan that just wrapped, and we talked about a plan within the plan, which is an iteration of some of the things that we've talked about today. So really, thinking about the long range plan, but hyper focusing on the near term and midterm activities that we need to take, hence plan within a plan, which I think is what the question is about. Really, this is, in my opinion, where the board needs to kick in, not only through their giving, but through their endorsement with some of your asks. So, Erin talked about new measures for board engagement. It cannot be giving as the sole indicator anymore. Our clients are finding so much success bringing a board member to a meeting to validate this sort of tumultuous moment, plan within the plan. We've always asked board members to take on that role. The call is even greater right now. Just having a board member with you to talk with your donors about the unique nature of this moment and this resource conundrum that you're experiencing. In addition to having board members support that financially, so kind of being first out of the gate to raise a hand to support, but also endorsing and validating the work that you're doing as an outside peer almost, looking at the organization objectively with their friend to ensure that it's a solid investment. So I would lean heavy on board here and really don't let them off the hook. This is an important part of their responsibilities.
Yeah, I was working with a client also in 2019 going into 2023, 2020, who was actually an arts and culture organization, so really saw a significant impact on the earned revenue side of their business model. And so really we're engaged in a very serious budgeting process at the end of 2020, looking at 2021, that involved a sort of high, medium, low expectation of many revenue streams, including earned revenue, but also philanthropy. And, as I was working with them in 2019, they were gearing up towards a campaign, which really shifted quite a bit through early 2020 and throughout 2020. But I think part of what they were looking at doing in their campaign is scaling up staff. And this, I think, comes to the question. What I'm hearing on the question is, some of the things that we might need to do today have a longer range impact on our ability to scale in the future. Like, for example, in this case, hiring additional major gift officer staff was a big question already for the organization. Then they faced, extreme shift in the budget and a little bit of change in planning. So I think I completely agree with what Melissa's saying about the importance of the board role in sort of seeing those long range needs and owning them and, developing a financial plan that supports that. And I also think it's upon us as, development professionals and leaders of nonprofits to see enough of that we have the long range vision in terms of our impact, but we also have a long range vision in terms of the work that we're going to need to be able to do. We don't have to have an exact plan of how that work will be activated, but we need to know things like, an additional major gift officer means our portfolio, we can add, X number of managed prospects, and that can create this kind of impact. And if we want to have that impact in 2 years, we need to make that investment today and really ramp up that portfolio, for example. So I do think at a high level, we need to know enough of that and communicate that to the board so that they can help us make these investments. And then the details of the plan, we might not get into as granular of details for a 5-year plan, for example, as we might for a 6 or 12-month plan. But I think it's a really great question. And Melissa, I love what you're saying about the plan within the plan and that's an important, it's part of the iterating that we're doing now to make it work.
I know we have to wrap up, but one more tip, find the fundable elements within that planning work you're doing, right? So last night I was chatting with a client about how they're doing a kind of like a crisis management plan or open safely plan. I was like, that is a fundable thing, right? So that is something that you can go to a donor and say, you know what, we're doing this work so that we can open safely. We're engaging all these partners and experts, and it's taking our executive leader time to craft this open safely plan.
That is something a donor can fund, and it's kind of an iteration of general operating support that is interesting and important work right now. So find those little pieces and invite your donors to support that work.
Well, thanks so much, Melissa and Erin. With that, we are going to wrap up our webinar. Thanks so much for joining us. Look out for our email with the webinar recording and slides, and don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions. We also encourage you to sign up for future Campbell & Company webinars. Next up is Looking Ahead in 2021, Emerging Trends in Philanthropy, and that'll be on January 26th. Enjoy the rest of your day.